بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله السلام الله عليكم to everyone. I have a very special conversation today. I have a special guest. I'm in conversation with Abdul Latif Whiteman. Salam Allah alaikum, Abdul Latif.
Alaikum assalam, and very nice to be here or there, wherever I'm supposed to be.
Abdul Latif, I have to tell you, I'm very excited to have this conversation because before we actually started this recording, you and I were trying to figure out how long we've been working together, somewhere between 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
And I think
and we've never actually met.
SubhanAllah,
world we live in now.
Yeah, well, our spirits are connected because all the work that we've done together is about Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what's more important than that? I don't think there's anything.
Yeah, I was looking at the number of books. It's quite a lot actually.
Yeah,
10 and 12 books. I can't remember. I mean,
yeah.
Recently, which is one of my favorite books. Actually, it really is.
Well, yeah, we're going to get into that. So for a lot of our listeners and our viewers out there who may not know who Abdul Latif Whiteman is, you probably have something that his heart and hands have touched in your homes. I'll give you an example. All the Al-Madina books, put that on camera. This is all designed by Abdul Latif, designed by Abdul Latif, and also it matches what's in the back there. And then Sajjad, can we bring up the screen? Actually, I want to show some of the works that you've worked on. Oh, there we go. MashaAllah, you have a lot of
it's ridiculous.
MashaAllah. Just let's scroll down, and as our viewers are seeing this, you're probably seeing right there books that you have on your shelves.
Guys, lots of them.
MashaAllah, look at that. You've impacted so many people with these texts, Abdul Latif. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. So
but one tries to stay invisible. One of the people I studied book design with, which was sort of happened by accident in the first place. He never used to put his name on the books, which I thought was rather good actually. It remained like in a way I'm sort of the invisible man. There's many things I've done in the past. I've been the guy who stands behind, or I'm just invisible. I'm the eminence grise, as I think they call it. Which I prefer. I'm not a front man actually. I don't really like talking to microphones to lots of people. I just get very embarrassed and regret what I say. Thing is, I start talking. The trouble is, especially if I had a few coffees, I can't stop. Actually, it's actually quite dangerous. You start saying things you wish you hadn't said. And anyway, it's been an adventure. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I want to do is, really, this is conversations for me because we've been working together for so long, and I really want to get to know you on even a deeper level. So, there's just some people that are joining us as we're having our coffee. So let's take our time, bi'idhnillah. And so let's start. Abdul Latif, tell me where you were born, where you grew up. Take me through this path.
I'm about as English as you could get. I was born 10 days after the last war, I mean the big war, World War, in an English country town. It was the 13th of Jumada Athani, 1364, if you must. But I checked it out the other day and realized that with Hijri dates, one's actually 2 years older, more or less, or something like that. It was a small English country town, which was actually a very Quaker town because my parents were Quakers. It had become Quakers probably after the First World War, when people became pacifists and reacted to the depression and rise of Nazism and so forth. The town was a very Quaker town. It was a Quaker school, which I went to, and all my family had been to this Quaker school. And I mean, Quakerism is interesting because it's not really religion, but good people, very nice people, very good memories of a very blissful childhood. Unfortunately, I can't have one of these. They talk to these film stars they were born in a garret and they were orphans. It's nothing like that for me. It was about as nice as you could get. I was the youngest of a family of four siblings. And after the war, things got a bit difficult. We moved then from this place called Saffron Walden, which is just near Cambridge, about 40 miles from London. I think my father had to move to London because the transport was bad. He was working in London. And we lived in London when I was when I was probably from about 4 till 6 or 7 or so. And that was when one started to sort of wake up to what the world was. And I have very vivid memories of it. In fact, I have memories of when I was 3 months old, would you believe it or not?
Mm.
Believe me when I say it, but if you see this little finger, you see it on the screen, it's got a slight squish at the end of it. Well, when I was 3 months old, it got shut into a metal French window when I was crawling around on the floor. And I remember it was very distinct. I don't remember the pain, because you never remember pain. But I remember being carried by my mother to the hospital, which was up the road, and going up the stairs of the hospital. Very, 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 very clear. Another memory is when I was 4 in London. It was just coming to consciousness in sort of post-war England, London especially. Everything was very pre-war, actually. Everything was, there were no new cars. All the cars were black, if I remember rightly, and very few cars. Life was slim, but, you know, it was kind of rich in other ways. There wasn't so much of stuff. This was before supermarkets came to England. I realized how different it was there at that time than what life is like now. With well, you know what the modern world is like. It's the same everywhere, and it's America.
Yeah, Latif, I want to just ask you this question because you're talking about growing up after World War II, and all we see in the news is World War III lurking. You see all these tensions across, and there's this fear. I mean, what was it like growing up in a post-war
Well,
UK London?
it was quite blissful. I mean, we lived in a leafy little, not very rich part of London near Epping Forest, and everything was delivered to the door.
Mm.
In a way, in many ways, it was more commodious, if you like, more convenient than it is now. There were very few cars around, because everything delivered to the door: bread, meat, fish, vegetables. Vegetables came in a covered wagon with a horse, and we didn't have so much of stuff, but everything had a kind of real taste to it. This was before the onset of plastic.
Mm.
All the electric plugs were made of Bakelite, which I do for Bakelite. It's a sort of resin which came out of coal, I think. And all the plugs were still pre-war. Nothing really changed.
Mm.
It was quite polluted. If I remember, there was a lot of fog in London at that time. And I was sort of waking up to diverse cultural threads which were quite important in my life, like music had an enormous impact on me. I mean, I remember we had a wind-up gramophone. We didn't have electric gramophones. You had to wind the gramophone up and you put the 78 on and you played it. And I remember little tunes from that time when I was very young. I was having piano lessons down the road. So I was coming to consciousness quite, I was quite smart. I used to try and sell things down the road out of my parents' bureau. Had to be returned. There was a few things I remember there was a polio scare, which was very, there was a lot of fear.
Mm.
Because we were suddenly in iron lungs and cinemas and swimming pools were closed. But we lived near this amazing forest called Epping Forest, which is it was just the end of our road. So we had many adventures there. I had a kind of very idyllic kind of childhood in a way. I don't remember any kind of real terrible dramas of any sort that some poor children have at these times. So I wouldn't say I was spoiled because we had very little.
Mm.
But what we had was actually had a real flavour to it. This was before food became organic.
Yeah.
All food was organic.
Yeah.
But I remember when they first introduced in this country town where we lived. It was there was a market where animals were sold, and it was a very traditional market town. And suddenly, the first supermarket came.
Mm.
Before supermarkets came, there were small shops that sold over the counter, and you've got butter and cheese cut on the slab.
Mm.
It was very, very traditional. In the main street there, called King Street, there were, I think, 4 grocery shops. The first supermarket came called Budgeon's. They all closed down within 1 year.
Mm.
And the atmosphere changed. The cattle market became a supermarket. The pig market became a big famous chemist called Boots. Everything changed. And that was, of course, went along with another kind of waking up to what the world was. I mean, the late 1950s to 1960s was very interesting. There was the Cold War was really getting going. And I have a very distinct memory of the Cuban Missile Crisis because we were playing football in a neighbouring town. And the referee was our music master, actually. And suddenly these B-52s started flying over the football pitch because Essex was surrounded by, Essex and Cambridgeshire was nothing but US bases. In fact, there were a lot of Americans living near to us at that time, and the first Black Americans I ever met were U.S. personnel, lovely people. They were called the Tim, was it Timmons or Tim Sergeant Tim? Extremely generous. They brought all their stuff they bought cheap on the U.S. from the Air Force Base, and they had so much stuff, and they just gave it to us. And when they left, they just left everything for us. We were astonished. And it was we were very much under the pall of American culture at that time. I think we really basically it was the end of the British Empire. I think the Second World War, and I think I did read somewhere that Roosevelt and Stalin had made a kind of tacit agreement to put the British Empire out of business because the British Empire owned all of the rubber plantations for the car industry and so on and so forth. And I think part of America helping Britain during the war was sacrificing, whole territories to the Americans, which they still hold, US bases, basically. So it wasn't just military, it was that culture as well. The culture was changing. We were listening to American music on the radio. And although we had a very traditional education, I mean, we did nothing but sing madrigals and Palestrina and in the end Verdi, and to a very high level. It was intensely musical. My whole teenage. I mean, England was a very musical kind of place. Certainly, the school was. We had more music teachers than any other teachers, I think. And but at the same time, America was coming in. It was Buddy Holly and the American music of the '60s, pop music coming in quite strongly. There wasn't really an English. What English music was pretty weak by comparison. The American music was so powerful. This was mostly black music too, apart from Buddy Holly, who was white, obviously. And although we were studying and singing very European music, it was a very beautiful experience. I wouldn't have missed it for anything. But we also had we had clubs in the school. Everyone had a club for something. There was the gardeners club, there was the farmers club, there was the radio club, there was the TV club, and there was the jazz club. Of course, I was sitting with. And we were listening to LPs to come from America, which you had to import especially then. And so we were listening to all this music coming out of New York I would call it the golden age of American jazz, which is about 1959 to 63. Miles Davis, Coltrane, Thelonious Monk, Bill Evans, Gil Evans, and we were listening to these records with absolute rapt attention. It was so revolutionary. It was so powerful because we realized this was the future, and we were listening to it. And what was it? I'd tell this to people who were very envious. It was November 1961. We had a trip. The club had a trip to see the John Coltrane Quintet in Gaumont State, Kilburn, with the Dizzy Gillespie big band. And if you were a music freak, this was like unbelievable. And it led me to, although I went through the traditional, English education, I wasn't very good at much, except I was good at art and I was good at physics for some strange reason. I had to drop mathematics quite early. So my father and my brother, who were, the Oxford educated, what does the youngest of the family do? And they said, well, become an architect because that's artistic and it's technical. So okay, fine, I'll become an architect. But actually, I wanted to go to London so I could become a jazz pianist. Really, truth. I thought this is the only way I'm going to get to London. Well, I got to London. I went to a very prestigious architectural school in 1963. And it was a massive change for me because I realised I'd been in this sort of country paradise for 18 years, or, in this sort of very nice family, and suddenly to be thrust into London, not into a university hall of residence, but I had to live on my own, and it was a massive shock. But it's one of these things that had to happen. And,
was it a religious family? I mean, was it a...
Well, Quaker, yeah, we could talk about that for a bit, because, as I said, Quakerism isn't really a kind of religion. It's actually called the Society of Friends. I mean, in theory, you as a Muslim could be a Quaker, because they're not. You go into a Quaker meeting house, as there was an old one in Saffron Walden, several hundred years old, and it was really, it had this ancient smell of slightly mildewy but old woodwork. No images anywhere, just benches.
Yeah.
It could be if you took the chairs out, it would be a mosque.
Yeah.
And to sit every Sunday for an hour in silence.
Yeah.
until someone was quite moved to stand up and speak, which did happen. It's actually not a bad thing to have to a teenage boy or girl, because it suddenly made you realize that you have a kind of monkey mind, and that you have to sort of wake up to the fact that you have an internal world going on, even if it's sort of unbearable or in some cases highly amusing. It would depend. The school we went to, the French school in Saffron Walden, was a boarding school, and there were a lot of boarders there, and people who weren't Muslims, weren't Quakers, but they would have to go to this meeting on Sundays, and be surprising how many of those people actually became Quakers as a result of that. Something, an hour's meditation on a Sunday, and other things they did in the school as well.
Well, we had a Quaker community where I grew up in upstate New York, and so
Right.
there are times where I went and visited them, and I sat with them on a Sunday, and it was quite an experience. As you mentioned, there everyone's silent, and then I just recall someone standing up, moved to say something,
Yeah.
and they sit back down. I'm like, for us, the concept of muraqabah, no one can sit silently these days. You got to pick up your phone constantly, and
A lot of Muslims would do the same, to sit silently, like the Navajos do. When the Navajos meet, they sit in silence for like 10 minutes before they say anything.
yeah.
They're just being done, but no, they're just sitting. It'd be a very good thing, a good discipline for a lot of us to sit.
Absolutely, it's a beautiful thing, actually.
Okay, shall we stop talking over a bit? Let's just take it.
We can't be silent.
But I think the problem was that, and generally the people connected with that school were very, very nice people. I've got very good memories of them. Really sincere, and a kind of a little bit lost. I think it was a kind of a sanctuary for them from the big wide world of atomic bombs, and because the month I was born in, they dropped these 2 bombs on Japan.
Yeah,
terrible. And of course the Quakers were being pacifists were outrageous. I mean, if you were a teenage boy, as I was at that point, they didn't really have many answers to the questions you were asking. This was a problem. And we were concerned about things. You talked about death, you see, and they sort of didn't really know what to say. They don't really, the non-Catholic, denominations don't have a feature of visiting graves like they do. I live in Spain, and visiting graves is part of their life, but taking flowers to their relatives are built into a kind of brick housing estate, which is very strange. They call them a niche. They don't actually bury them in the ground. If they find a body in the ground here in Spain, it's usually a Muslim, actually. So things like death, and when you're a teenager, you do think about these things. And we'd had a small road accident, I remember, in my father's car. We did before the time safety belts, and actually we were actually stationary in the car, and this was a policeman in the car. I think he was on drugs or something, but he drove across a 2-lane freeway and at a traffic lights and crashed into us. But we all bumped and got very shocked, and it makes you think. You think we in those days there were some pretty horrible road accidents in England. The road, there were too many cars, not very good roads, and if you had a crash, someone usually died. I know this happened in America as well. My wife's American. I have many stories of people going off and all dying one night, in a terrible crash. So, and I remember we had a headmaster at the school that once asked us to write an essay on the mystical life. This was, and I've still got the essay somewhere deep down in my stuff. But you don't really have any answers. But you think about it. It's sort of fear, but also a sort of curiosity as well. And I think more children think about death than they care to admit. And people don't have the answers apart from really the Muslims. The Muslims got the best answer to death than anyone does. And not that I found it before I accepted Islam. I don't think I really asked too many questions about it. There were other things going on. But it was, I mean, there wasn't much distinction in a way. For instance, when people would die, they usually cremated, even if they were Quakers. There was, although the Bible was quite emphatic, bury your dead, they would rather be fried to a crisp in a crematorium. Things like that kind of upset me. It still does, actually. Most of my relatives were cremated, and I never went to the cremation, but I would go to whatever was afterwards. It's just something I really couldn't stomach. I don't know why. It's obviously, if you grew up in an Arab family, in a Muslim family like yourself, you're faced with slightly different sort of core beliefs from the word go. and it's in a way it's a kind of huge adjustment, especially if you have children. I mean, I've got 4 children, and I've got grandchildren too. Growing up in that sort of first Muslim community that we had in London was quite difficult for them, you know, because we weren't sure of ourselves at all. I mean, that came later in the story. I should say. I'm just jumping
Yeah,
ahead.
so yeah, bring me. So you're in London. You know, you're clearly someone who's into music, and
Well, I was studying architecture ostensibly.
right, you're studying architecture. And where does this take you?
Well, I was very disappointed in the music scene in London. I realised because you know, what I listened to out on record in the country was really good soulful bluesy jazz, really beautiful music. And I thought I would find this if I went to London. Of course, it wasn't like that at all. It was heavy drinking, very fast saxophone playing, and very little soul.
Right.
But you know, at the same time, I was actually studying architecture best I could. You know, I was good at drawing, and being surrounded by a strange collection of people from sort of public school boys from Eton and working class boys from north of England. It was a very interesting education, but I don't think I was very good at the subject. I wasn't that interested in architecture, to tell you the truth. I like drawing. I like the business of drawing presentations and so forth. But it's a funny kind of cult, architecture, and I've got my own theories about it. I think I did learn a lot. I learned a lot about designing things. Interesting. The very first project we did at the architecture school was actually Roman lettering. It wasn't architecture at all. It was just doing. You know what Roman lettering is? No, maybe you don't. But I think I was very interested in things like calligraphy from before I was introduced to architecture. Architecture is something I've seen very much in the last 10, 20 years, especially with people building new mosques and things in England and elsewhere in Spain and everywhere. Just exactly I mean, this is a whole other subject, you know, we could talk for hours about it, about just really what mosques are, what our buildings are, what are architects. Because architects, as far as I'm concerned, really cause a lot of trouble. I blame them for a lot of the ills of urban life. I blame them for a lot of just crazy ideas of how people should live. You know, why should we get some highly trained architect to tell us what kind of house we should live in? And people should be connected to their own houses and actually help build their own houses. You know, when I suggested to when we were working on the Cambridge Mosque, I said, "Well, can't you get some of the locals to help build it?" They said, "Oh no, you can't because of health and safety. You know, there's insurance. You can't do that." Which is, you know, compared to these mosques they have in Mali, where the whole community comes out and puts mud on the building every year. You know, so it's robbing people of something which is really special. As I said, this is another whole subject. We could get lost into it. Okay, I'm in London, and looking for ways of playing music as well, because of what I really was there for. This was, I mean, the very first concert they had in the architectural school, they had this very hip idea of a Christmas celebration, was hiring all these bands. They've had a lot of money, these people there. And we had a studio we worked in the daytime, and for this event, we had the Pink Floyd playing in it. The Pink Floyd became very famous, of course, but this is with Syd Barrett, who there was a very mentally disturbed singer. And I thought it was repulsive. They had this light show behind. This is the beginning of Flower Power in London, which I was completely unaware of, but it was happening down the road. Mostly I was surrounded by architects and jazz musicians who were drinkers. I mean, believe me, architects drink. I think they still drink a lot as well, actually. It was quite heavy, actually. You know, building is a heavy kind of building, and designing buildings is big money. It's some of the architects who would come in and we consulted about various presentations. For instance, it wasn't really like a university. It was actually run by architects, and if you produced a project, they would bring in these heavy-duty architects to criticize it. So you would have what's called a crit. And they would slaughter people. You know, they'd have a couple of bottles of vin rosé for lunch and then go in and wreak havoc. It's a really had to be strong to survive. And there were a couple of architects. I think my 4th year there was two guys. One called Nicholas. I forgot their names now. But actually quite liked what I was doing, which was encouraging. and I liked what they did as well. And they became, I think, they became knight. They became sir or whatever it's later on. But you know, it was so changing then. That these were people who were starting to smoke dope, I think, rather than drinking. One aspect of the architecture is the heavy drinking, modern architecture, heavy glass, you know, and tough stuff, brutalistic concrete. Then along come the dope smokers, and it all becomes kind of light and airy and glass.
Right, right.
And it's just part of the environment, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not endorsing it at all, but this is what was happening in the 60s. Because I went 63, from 63 to 60, I was off and on doing the architectural course to about 69. But what happened was that I don't know I don't know if you know what a Hammond organ is, but a Hammond organ is this thing that they have often in the gospel churches. It's this great sound, Jimmy Smith. Well, I managed to get one. I got my father to sign for a hire purchase agreement. And I was in like that. I was suddenly being hired to play in people's parties. We had professional musicians playing with us. And I got the most incredible gigs just on my own. We did one in Oxford University with the Hollies and the Yardbirds. It was just incredible. You know, it was just the beginning of the what became the flower power, you know, the swinging London. I was a bit snobbish about it, too. I was a jazz snob, really. But I then kind of fell headlong into the world of really. I thought you call it rock music, but it was whatever you brought to the party. You know, we used to play these free concerts in Hyde Park, and people who played there was everything you could imagine, from African bands to folk music to heavy rock to kind of folk music. It was whatever. It hadn't been packaged as flower power or as, you know, what it became. It was very liberal, very free-minded. People were adventurous. They just did whatever they wanted to do. But of course, in come the record companies, and they start making it into something. So anyway, I went through. I eventually joined I got so desperate doing architecture. It was so awful. I had earned money designing the military restaurants for the Navy. And I was in this place in London. I think I'm going to go mad if I do this. I was doing literally working with uniformed officers, deciding what they called the NAFIs, Navy, Air Force, Army, Food. It had an acronym. And one day I thought, I've got to get out of this. And there was this. There was a newspaper at the time in which all the musicians read, called the Melody Maker in London. Everybody read it, and I found this small ad in it, a classified. This is a very important part of the story, actually. There was a classified ad that said, "Wanted keyboard player for working group." I thought, okay, I'll phone it up. So I phoned up, and this guy picked up the phone and said, "Oh, this is Roger." And I said, "Oh, well, should I come and see you?" And he said, "Yeah, where do you live?" And I said, "I live in Grafton Road in Kentish Town." He said, "That's where we live." Well, some of the band lived in the same road, which was at the time full of architects. It was a house we had with all the architects, people from the architectural school. And we met, and without even having an audition, I joined the band. These were working class guys from North London, and they were actually an active band playing they were playing kind of Motown, Stax music, West Coast stuff like the Byrds and stuff you may not even know of, the Association music. And we really connected. The thing about Motown, which is interesting, it was a kind of leveler. The jazzers and the rockers and the soul people could all meet at one level, and it was, you know, I was very into it. They were, so overnight I joined the world of showbiz. I'm not joking. The very next day, I think I was in a photo session. We were in a recording studio. We were recording with George Martin, who was the Beatles recording manager. We were playing on radio shows. I don't think we did any television then. It was exhausting because I was still playing. I was still working as a student. You know, we travelled to gigs the other side of England and come back the next day. I had to go to a lecture, and I was sort of falling asleep in lectures. After a time, it just became too much, and I kind of left. But then the lead singer of this band left as well, so suddenly I was back into it. And then an interesting thing happened. They had to reconstruct this band out of nothing. This is a key part of the story still. Don't get lost. This guitarist joined. His name was, at the time, Martin Stone. He came along with a Les Paul custom guitar, which is rock It was a very famous guitar. And in the other hand, he had a copy of the Upanishads. Whoa, what was going to happen to this? Suddenly the Ludwig sign on the bass drum, and the drummer's bass drum said there was suddenly an Om symbol appeared on the drum bass drum. We were going to gigs with books of Eastern wisdom. These other groups were going to gigs around England, piled with whatever, beer and dope and whatever. We were going around reading books of Ouspensky, Gurdjieff, Eastern wisdom, everything you can imagine. And of course, it's very infectious when you have a small group of people traveling around playing music. It gets, I was curious. I wasn't really into it, telling the truth, but some of the others were. Anyway, this young guy called Abdul, his name is Martin. At a certain point in our story, it went over several years, this of course, he disappeared to Morocco, was taken to Morocco, and he met this great Sheikh Mohammed Habib, whose tomb I think he visited in Meknes.
Oh, Sheikh Mohammed ibn al-Habib. I mean, subhanallah, this is incredible man.
This met him when he was alive, and he made shahada with him, and he gave him his name Abdul Malik. Now, he came back, but he didn't tell us. We were playing as this music group with this hidden Sufi amongst us. I had no idea what was going on until we were in Munich on tour, and I went into this hotel room where Martin was, and I thought he was looking under the bed. Right? And I said, Martin, are you right? Can I help you? No answer. I left him. Okay, later on in that tour, we were driving along a motorway in the Autobahn in northern Germany or Belgium somewhere. I was sitting in the backseat of this van, which had all the equipment and so forth. And the driver suddenly braked, and all the books which were on top of the equipment fell on my head.
I just want to show everyone while you're telling the story. This is Mohammed ibn al-Habib. So to all of our viewers that are here, Sheikh Mohammed ibn al-Habib, rahmatullahi alayhi, he was a great spiritual, saintly scholar of the Sharia of Islam and the Sufi path, the path of tazkiyatun nafs, purification of the soul. He studied with Sheikh al-Alawi, not of course Sheikh al-Alawi al-Maliki. He's older than Sheikh al-Alawi al-Maliki, and he passed away in the 70s. We're talking about the Sheikh al-Alawi that many of us know. And he was a murabbi. He was individual who took people at their different states, and he helped them have a more purified, dignified relationship with Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi. And he's buried in Meknes. And I think he died in the early 70s, I believe, or mid 70s.
Yeah, he died 2 months after we met him.
Oh, so you met him as well. So we're going to get into that part because that's
we the story of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying that Martin.
Well, anyway, the books fell on my head. The books were the hardback editions of Yusuf Ali's Arabic English Qurans. I still didn't get it. I mean, so what fell on my head?
The Quran falls on your head.
Importantly, 1970. This was 1970, I think. Important at that time, you see, if you had said the word Islam, nobody would have known what you were talking about. You could have said Muslim, they would think you were mentioning a fabric. In fact, even I thought Muslim and Muslim and Muslim are the same thing. So you have to imagine this is a world where this is unknown. In a way, it made it sort of easier in a way, but having one member of this band suddenly praying, which is what he was doing when I went into his room. Of course, we were curious and slightly nervous about what does this mean, Anyway, another two members of the drummer then became, he went with Martin back to Meknes and met him in Habib as well and became Muslim. They came back and we were making a record at the time, a second album, which had sort of run into we'd run out of ideas actually, I think a bit, but it was good. It was in a way that many of the songs in that album were about this process of kind of spiritual awakening, actually, to be quite honest, both in the lyrics and in the kind of the music. It was very sort of a pretty meditative kind of album, although it was still it's a rock album. It was the very first album we done was a real wild affair, very egoless. But the second one was very much quieter and mellow, and it was about this transition, in fact. But what happened was that we'd finished the album, and then what happened? I don't know what happened. I think the first thing I did was I heard some singing and recitation from Morocco, which had been recorded in that Zawiya where he's buried. At the time, I wasn't Muslim, but I heard this music. We'd run out of ideas, basically. They just weren't very inspired. The 60s was about experimentation. It was sex, drugs, rock and roll, and everyone had a different idea about everything. Every band basically represented some sort of religious group. There was bands there were the New York Jews from doing Hare Krishna. I knew the people in that band. They were called the Quintessence. There was another band who were into Celtic Christianity called can't remember their name. It was as if there was a front, and we were this load of Sufis in this band. Four became Muslims. All of them met Ibn Habib. 3 went on Hajj. 2 are now dead. So that's that history wrapped up. But it was a very, very strange experience actually, because people you knew very well who suddenly they changed, because Islam changes people. So they were washing and they weren't sort of smoking dope anymore. They were suddenly wearing tasbihs around their necks and had hats on, and you felt a bit kind of threatened. And it's very strange. And I remember asking Abdul Malik, because Martin became Abdul Malik, and I remember very clearly saying to him one day, "What is Islam?" He said, curiously, "It's astonishment." And I thought about this for the last 50 years. I thought about what this meant, and in a way, I kind of know what he means now. It's something which you didn't know about, and your astonishment, which is something is revealed to you, you had no idea existed. I take you to a wonderful room, you will be astonished because you know it was Islam. Does that make any sense to you? It's an interesting way of describing Islam.
It is very, yeah.
In a way, the revelation itself was an astonishment.
Absolutely.
So anyway, and so in a way, I was kind of cornered because I love this recitation from McNair's, and I thought, and the singing. I didn't read my way into Islam. I wasn't reading books. I think I did read a pictorial Quran at the time, but I didn't really understand it. Actually, it was too kind of convoluted. It was just very literary. What I did like was this singing. I thought, this is whatever that is. I wanted it, even if I had to sort of stand on my head and do whatever. But because it meant washing and praying and everything that you do. So I said, okay, I'm cornered. I want to make this step. And of course, I think the first few years, I found it very, very difficult. Actually, it was very. Some people say the Shahada, and they say, I'm happy, I'm in paradise. It wasn't for me at all. It was real. I think I really had to sort of deal with 13 years of loss of innocence living in London. In some ways, I thought it was like going through one's death throes. It was a sudden encounter with the self, which I really hadn't bargained on.
Oh yeah, isn't it amazing, Abdul? And that's the thing, the whole essence of spiritual transformation is, facing yourself.
Yeah.
And dealing with all of that ugliness inside you that typically we like to blame other people for, and be like, oh, it's his fault, it's her fault, she did it. But no, I'm the problem.
I think even people brought up in a Muslim environment with Muslim families, at a certain point in their life, they probably have to face the same thing. I don't know.
Oh, well, I mean, we would hope, and that's that's the thing that we've been trying to encourage through all of the work that we've been publishing together is like, listen, we got to take the spiritual mirror and put it in front of us and deal with all of our misgivings and our faults and our problems, and then you have the whole hard process of changing.
Yeah. When I went on Hajj in 73, 74 over that period, and when my father was very ill at the time, I knew he had cancer, and I was making dua for him in the Haramain. And when I got back, I had to go back working in an architect's office, which I hated, designing industrial doors for my sins. And then it was amazing because the architects I worked for, well, they were just architects. One day, one of the architects came in sort of giggling, and I said, "Oh, you're right." And he says, my wife tried to commit suicide, that's all. I was so shocked. I put my rotring pen, we had pens and drawing boards then, I put the pen down and I just walked out. I can't take this. That night, my father died. We had telegrams in those days. There was a knock on my window, and it was at 2 a.m, and it says, "Your father's died." And it was as if the act of walking out of the architectural architect's studio office. I'd rejected suddenly this father. This sounds a bit psychological, but to me it was quite real at the time. Because whenever I went to work for architects, it was like I was going to see the bank manager. I was going to see this figure who was going to help me. And I hated doing it, but I was forced to do it. By rejecting this architect to say, no, I don't want any more of this, I had killed the sort of the fantasy father figure, but the real father figure also passed away. Then what happened was very strange, because over a period of a few weeks, I had dreams of my father in a terrible state. It was really awful. It was like it was sort of like decomposing in some strange world. And then suddenly one of the dreams, there was this burst of light and it stopped. And I figured that this was some kind of post-death purification, which in a way I kind of likened a bit to what interning in Islam was like. It was suddenly, when people die, they suddenly encounter their selves, their ego, if you like, with the nafs, which they've never really maybe looked at before. And if they were good people, I think there's a merciful end. I really do think that. I mean, my parents they were good people. They were believers actually, but they just didn't know how to talk about God or religious things. The nearest my father could talk about God was like Tolstoy.
Right.
Tolstoy was.
So at this point, you converted to Islam, and you're there with Martin, and how does that bring you to Morocco? How does that bring you to?
Well, that was in May or June 1971. Anyway, what came very quickly in October was Ramadan, and also we were going to go to Morocco for Ramadan. So I flew with Martin and his then wife and one of the band called Hajj Amin. We began the journey to go to Morocco. We got to Gibraltar. We flew on this. They were called the Comet 4Bs. I think all of them crashed. Actually, it was the first English jetliner, but it landed in Gibraltar. Which, if you've ever been to Gibraltar, the plane sort of do a kind of spiral to land on this tiny runway because of the Spanish flight limitations. Anyway, we spent the night in Gibraltar in the hotel. Went down to get the ferry to Tangier. And they wouldn't let us on because our hair was too long. It was this grumpy Moroccan. So this was the first sort of like shock. I mean, we had our plan. This was going to be wonderful. No, you have another plan. And actually, the other plan was better. I'll tell you what happened. Someone had the idea of asking one of the fishing boats in Gibraltar in the harbour. We found this Australian who had a small boat, and he said, "Could you take us to Ceuta, which is on the Spanish opposite Gibraltar in North? It's sort of enclave, the Spanish enclave in Morocco." And so we paid him £20, and he took us over, and it was beautiful. It was like we were followed by porpoises, or I don't think they were dolphins. I think they were porpoises, and in this sunshine and the spray, it was beautiful. Met by the Spanish police, who were fine. They were fine coming. The Moroccans were a bit sort of like, who are these funny people? Then we drove through to Tangier, got there at night. And this was when this Hotel Continental hadn't been modernised, and it was this old sort of mildewy hotel with no hot water. And this was suddenly in Africa for the first time in a Muslim country for the first time. And I remember sleeping and saying there was this enormous. Oh no, there's this music in the street. There was a thing called the Asawiya, who they go down the streets singing and playing these funny, like kind of big oboes, singing, playing in drums. It was a Ramadan thing, I think. And suddenly there was a cannon went off. Bang! This is a funny English boy coming into I thought I'd come into a war, but it was the beginning of the fast. So we got up. We didn't fast because we were travelling. Then we took the train. Then this is a wonderful old hotel, which is actually Francis Ford Coppola wanted to buy it. Believe it or not, they refused to sell it. There was almost incredibly intriguing this hotel during the war because it was neutral in Tangier. It was a place we got to really love, and I've been back to many times. We got the train then down to Meknes, arrived there. We parked the Zawiya was fairly basic then. You had sort of 2 light bulbs and a lot of rugs on the floor. And we were parked in the back in these rooms with just horsehair mattresses and cold water and very smelly toilets. And we were just, this is, okay, we're here. And of course it started up immediately. We were doing suhoor and we were fasting. It was very difficult. I mean, this is the first time we'd ever fasted. Anyway, what was interesting was that every Asr, after Salat al-Asr, the place was absolutely jam-packed with people. Because Ibn Habib gave a Quran commentary after Asr every day, right through Ramadan, even though it was over 100. And I've never seen anything like it, because there's nothing in the kind of sort of religious social lexicon like it in England, of this sort of saintly figure talking to these men. I mean, we were sitting there racked with pain in our knees, stomachs doing this, listening to someone speaking a language we didn't understand, but it was incredible. Agony and ecstasy sort of all woven up into one little ball.
Yeah.
And it was very beautiful. This beautiful Quran singing each time. And you said that book there, the Durses of Ibn Habib. Well, we heard some of we were there for 2 weeks, because we had another part of a tour to do in Europe the last 2 weeks of Ramadan. So every day we would sit this, and the place was absolutely packed out with the most amazing looking men. I've never seen anything like it. Incredible clothes, the silhams, and some old, some are younger, but the most incredible atmosphere. You could sort of slice it and package it. It was so rich in this atmosphere. And when he came, his house was sort of next door to that big room where he's buried now, and he would come in, and it was like, I'd never seen anyone quite like it. It was like it was power and humility, and all wrapped up in one. I'd never seen anything like it. It was almost sort of genderless. Had coal in his eyes, very much as you see it. I had seen anything like it. I couldn't compare it with anything. It was like a biblical prophet with his disciples. But we would queue up and then kiss his hand, and then we were actually, in the time we were there, the 2 weeks we were there, we were taken up to meet him, and we would just sit. I mean, it was like being in front of a laser beam. You just sort of sat there. You couldn't speak. I mean, people would ask a few questions, because most of the time you just sat silently and just let it drift over you. I remember Hashim in McNass, before he died, he said that if you visit these saintly men, if you sit with them for the time it takes to milk a goat, you've succeeded.
Yeah.
But that's all we could do. We could do nothing else. I mean, it was just bewildering. I mean, I've had an MRI. You know what an MRI is?
Oh, yes.
You get inside this giant machine, and you were bombarded with all kinds of weird things. Well, this was the kind of spiritual equivalent of it, I think.
Oh, wow.
You come out slightly dazed, but it was. I mean, I think maybe seeing someone with coal in their eyes for the first time was, and if this kind of white bit of thing on a green turban, but it was really extraordinary. I just never seen anything like it, so I was dumbfounded. I was with Martin in one of these rooms at the back. There was just rooms where we were staying. And do you remember the poet Abdul?
Rahmatullah. He was in Philadelphia. Rahmatullah alayhi. Yeah.
Well, he was in one end of the room with a high fever, lying at the end of this room, and I was chatting away with Martin.
So Abdul Rahmatullah alayhi was with you when you were...
He'd gone in advance of us, actually, because he was an American group that had come over from California.
Okay.
They went down before us, and they were installed there. But he was ill, and it was evening time. I'm not sure it was afterward eaten, I think. They would do tarawih at night and in the morning. They would split it. His bubba. Anyway, suddenly Ibn Habib comes in the room, and suddenly myself and Martin are completely like dumbstruck. It was like this huge ship coming into a harbour. You didn't speak, and he'd come down by himself from he had room up in this tower. He'd come down unaided. He knew he was ill, and I think he was sat with him for about 10 or 15 minutes, making dua with his hand on his head, and then left. This was the nearest we really had any real encounter with him. If we were there just as guests. I think he knew who we were. He said all we were was the answer to an old man's prayer, and all he had done was take these dusty glasses out from the back of a cupboard and polished them up. And there was a few little things he said which came down to us, through various interpreters. One was my favourite. Was he said, "Don't worry about death. It's going from the third-class compartment to the first-class compartment." Very simple imagery, because I can remember when there was a third-class compartment in English railway trains. There was you had a mixture of fear and love. I never experienced anything like it before. It was
Isn't that incredible? It's what, this jalal and this jamal
yes, exactly.
together.
It was fear, but also I saw the way he was with his people was so gentle. They were interjecting all the time as he was speaking. I mean, those the those translations you're reading are actually. I don't know if they've been the ones I've got, but they had all the pauses. And they've been making a transcription of talk speech. It's very difficult. I found out because so often they repeat or you have pauses and whatever. But very often he would start an ayat, and someone else would complete it for it. And I've seen other pictures of him with people with their arms around him. It's very, very gentle. But I think some of the people we will start with were zealous, slightly overzealous. I think hands with converts, particularly, they get a bit carried away. And I think there was all kinds of. This was the age of sort of encounter group therapy, and somehow entering Islam was about demolishing your ego, Western style, rather than just. I think people have to be very gentle with people who come into Islam, and there were people who left Islam from that time. Even Ibn Habib, people who left Islam, left everything, as well as people who died, of course.
Yeah, what's incredible, Abdul Latif, as you're describing Sheikh Mohammed ibn al-Habib, may Allah have mercy on him. These sort of individuals, just being in their presence is in itself the medicine, because these are practitioners. These are individuals who are sincerely seeking God, and they're doing things in the privacy of their own home. And then you don't even have to ask them a question. You just got to sit there and you have to be with them.
Yeah, it's about Allah actually. In the end, it's not about they're not. It's not. It's like they're not calculating anything. It's just happening.
Yeah.
Well,
It's so interesting because nowadays the du'at, like, every move is calculated. What they say, when they say, to who they say it, how they act, because they're witnessing you. Individuals like Sheikh Mohammed ibn al-Habib and the awliya of Allah, they're witnessing Allah. So that's
exactly. Yeah, quite. And it's something I think. I really fell in love with singing. I got roped into sing a lot because no one else. I'm a musical background, and I found these tunes were easy to learn, and other people found them more difficult to learn. Even to this day, I'm still asked to sing because I can remember the tunes, or I can remember the tunes and when to change them. This is the point. That's another.
Well, can you? I don't want to put you on the spot, but one of the we recite very often here in Maryland. Nahnu fi rawdat al-rasuli.
Well, there's lots of tunes. There's quite a few tunes to that, actually.
Well, you just share with us whatever you'd like. And this is from the Diwan of Sheikh Mohammed ibn al-Habib. Sheikh Mohammed ibn al-Habib, rahmatullahi alayhi. Again, to all the listeners, this is someone that we should all know. This was a man who loved Allah and His Messenger, peace be upon him. He was an Islamic scholar, and he really transformed the hearts of individuals around him. And he wrote a lot of poetry. And one of the pieces of poetry that he wrote is about being in the Rawda of the Messenger of God, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's very beautiful.
I think he actually wrote it in the Rawda.
In the Rawda, yeah, it's incredible.
In the presence of the Messenger. I mean, it's.
Why don't you give us something, anything?
One way you remember these tunes is because of the words. So everyone goes, "Nahnu fi rawdati rasuli huturan, fali bina rida wa husna qabuli." But there are other ways of singing it. People get annoyed with it because I like really nice, complicated ones I've learned. And I tend to do the simple ones. We can't do the difficult ones.
I don't know. Never get annoyed with you here. So
Allah, 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 ya la, Allah, 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 la ilaha illallah. You have to sort of sense the occasion actually for what kind of tunes you use, because I can get a bit carried away sometimes because there's a whole ocean of music when you go into that. And we did meet Mohammed Banis from Fez, who was a real munshid. We learned a lot. I learned a lot from. I've collected many over the years, and still doing it actually. To tell you the truth, and some of them are wonderfully complicated and beautiful. When you first hear them, you think, how can you remember these things? But you start seeing them, no. محمد من You might think it sounds pretty strange, but it's actually they're very addictive. And
Beautiful.
you have the slightest musical mind, it's just very appealing. And of course, it's very ancient. I mean, I think people say it started in Cordoba with Ziriab.
Mm.
And I think it's changed a lot since then. But I think the root of it was really, of Andalus was from Cordoba, 10th century, a long time ago. And it's been kept alive in families. And there's been influences that have come in from the Ganawa, from Algeria, from other sources. And of course, it's a living thing, which is why it's really extraordinary when you see the way that it's preserved in places with these singers in Fez that we were recorded with, and we were meeting up in June actually in Bradford. It's a fine art. I mean, and also it's a form which hasn't really changed for 1,000 years.
Right.
Which is why it's so vital. It's not been written down like Western music is. It's kept alive because Mohammed Banis, who I learned a lot from, he said he learned everything from his sister.
Interesting.
And if you go to different cities in Morocco, you'll find the singers there have very slightly different kind of repertoire, but we'll put them together and they all know what to do.
Yeah. They feel each other's spiritual energy, and they know the tones. Yeah.
And also once you get to Fez, you suddenly enter the world of the instrumental musicians, which something to particularly like. It's a very specialized thing, but when you hear the Fiashia or the Borda sung with the Haraki orchestra from Tetuan, it's pretty amazing actually. But it has to be very contained. The Haraki in not in Tetuan had a kind of special. Sheikh Harak had a special kind of rhythm to use musical instruments because it did pull people in. And I don't feel very rigid about it. I don't really like people adding drums too much to this, especially this kind of Andalusi stuff. It's a bit too heavy actually. It's really just a sung thing.
Is the Fiashia something that you recite often?
Not at all actually. I just know it because it's something about the Fiashia. It's in a lot of it's in Darija, I think, which is I mean, I know bits of it, but I don't actually sing. I mostly sing what I can sing out of here, because and a few things by Sheikh Al-Alawi, and there's a few other qasidas by. I mean, the qasidas in here are not all by Ibn Habib. There's some by Ahmed Badawi. I think the Kamlaka Minas, I think, is Qadi Ayad. I think he wrote from Granada. I think he wrote, because Kamlaka Min is not really Sufism either. It's very famous in Morocco. Everyone sings Kamlaka min ya mati alayya, Kamlaka min ya mati alayya, Allah Allah, Kamlaka min ya mati alayya, walam tazal ilahi. I forgot the words. Allah. But when they all do it together, there's a form which is like, for instance, they do the Burda in Fez. They do half of it one Juma, and they do another half of it second Juma, and so forth, and rotate it. And they will pause for the Mawal, which is a sort of solo singing. They all know it. It's incredible. And just most unlikely looking guy will have the most incredible voice. By Burda by heart. It's so much part of their society, and they'll be singing at weddings. Someone's dying, they'll be singing. They'll be performing for the king, or they'll be performing in the sacred music concert. It's very much, it's the classical music of Morocco. It's very beautiful. And I've got a theory, which I think is backed up by other ethnomusicologists, that the actual form, when they had with musical instruments, especially this kind of form of the concert, was very much influenced the Renaissance in Italy, because they almost choose the same form. They have the overture. They have all these, and then they have the solo spots and so forth. It was so powerful. I mean, so much of Western culture actually really came from Andalus, because when it finished, it's almost 1492 was when it stopped. It's sort of when the Renaissance started in Italy, mid of the 14th century. Venice, of course, was a great centre of all that. Sorry, I'm wandering away from the...
No. I mean, I know it's getting late there. You're in Spain, but I want to ask you, for our audience here, how did all of this translate into book design? How did you land there?
Okay, I could just wind on a few years. Well, we had a community in London for about It was in London for about, we had a Zawi there, which was, it was an adventurous, experimental thing, and it worked. Introduced a lot of us to a lot of interesting things, and I think it made us take Islam seriously. But then it moved out to the country. A lot of things went wrong. The problem with the community there, with there's no real greater Muslim community. There was a few people who supported it, but people get funny ideas. There was money got involved, and it kind of broke up. That community broke up, which was actually a good thing, because then some people went to the Gulf to study. Other people went to Morocco and back to America. There was a lot of splitting up.
Yeah, this is a community. I don't know how deep you want to get into it, Abdul Latif, but yeah, a lot of people knew. Everyone heard bits and pieces of the story, and he was involved, and this was involved, and the sheikh was this. And then
if you want the whole grisly story, you have to go and buy my book. When they TV things, they plug their book.
Actually, we're going to show the book
because I felt compelled to write it. Although I didn't actually set out to write a book, but there was so much that had to be told of that story as honestly as possible, without being too unkind to anybody, but to tell the truth as much as I can ever tell the truth.
Well, where did you write the story?
Well, where or when?
Where? In which text?
Well, I wrote the book. This book called Average Whiteman. I wrote it end of COVID. Everyone wrote biographies in COVID. I know lots of people.
Average Whiteman. Here we go.
It was, but it covered really from where it all started. When we
I'm going to send it to Sajjad. Sajjad, if you can bring this up on screen, it's on Mecca Books. Hold on one sec. We want everyone to go out there and purchase this book. It's on meccabooks.com.
Yeah, you can buy it. It's true, actually. Yeah.
Or wherever you want people to go to buy it, but that's not what we're showing. What is going on? There we go.
That's it. There you go. There you go. It's the pictures. It's sort of it's like a scrapbook on the front.
Yeah, that's really nice.
The thing about the book was that it's kind of all true, which is it's easy to write a book, it's easy to design a book, it's easy to print a book, but to sell a book and distribute it is impossible. Yeah. You're up against. And frankly, I nearly didn't do it because, bearing your soul to the public is not an easy thing to do. And I was in a fire of deliberation for a long time. This was at the end of COVID, and people were getting a bit strange. So I said other people wrote bios at the same time, and but when I finally pressed the send to the printer, all my kind of angst and anxiety about it left completely.
Yeah.
It was such a liberation. I'd sort of bottled up all this kind of when these funny things happen to communities, people are left with a lot of guilt and embarrassment, shame, not wanting to talk about it. But the further I get away from it, the more I can appreciate what was good about it. And when these things happen, you have to go back and say, well, this was the bad bit, this was the good bit, leave the bad bit, carry on. And that's the only way to deal with it. And I think the book actually had a therapeutic effect for several people who read it. But it's not an easy read in places. I mean, it's quite light-hearted generally, but there was a few bits were very difficult, which were hard to write about. But I felt they had to be done. And I think Dr. Abdullah said to me about it because he knew about it. He said, well, 100 years, people will want to know what happened in this funny bit of history. And no one had written about it. And there's this funny episode in London between 1970 and 1980, roughly.
Yeah, because alhamdulillah, one of my teachers is Sheikh Mohsen Najjar, and he was.
Oh, I know him. He was part of it.
Exactly, Sheikh. So I would never dare ask him any questions, but throughout history, little bits and pieces were coming out, and I was like, interesting, and so subhanallah. Sheikh Mohsen has sort of your view on it in terms of, when we did finally talk about it. It's a more holistic view, especially when you're talking about, 25, 30, 40 years later. You're able to have a very different perspective than when you're in the thick of it.
Yeah. It was, we were just I think we were making mistakes, but I think what happened when it all broke up, there was various people suddenly emerged as I would call my reference points in life, which I needed because we were floating about looking for things, and we went to Tunisia. There was a sheikh there we visited. We thought we had to kind of recover our kind of spiritual path, if you like, because we had to deal with everyday things of having children and just earning a crust. This was the reality of it, because in that kind of community situation, we all become incredibly poor. all my sort of my friends from before Islam had all been, you know, they were on their second mortgage by that time. You know, so we'd spent all our wealth on travel.
Yeah,
had numerous journeys to everywhere. It was, but if these reference points, from in my case, the first one was Hamza Yusuf, who was he was 18-year-old when I first met him. He was in Tucson and was very young. And the other one, of course, was Abdul Hakim Morad. They're both in as sheikh or professor or whatever they are these times. And for me, they were like, well, I kind of knew them partly because, well, they wanted me to do work with them to develop things. And this was when Zaytuna was sort of embryonic, and some of Abdul Hakim's schemes were embryonic as well. And I promise you, if you get in with the logo, you've got your foot in the door. And I've been, you know, I think I did the one for the Zaytuna for nothing. He was staying in my house at the time, and he was working on this Zaytuna Institute. Was a sort of I think it's sort of vaguely started in COVID. This was 1997.
yeah,
It's, you know, and then when you go for the logo, then you get the business card, then you get the brochure, then you get then you get. This is how I got into books, actually. But before then, I must tell you, I was actually. It was after the fallout of this community. I was actually working for an architect in Cambridge for 2 years, and in that time, I became very, very good on an Apple Mac, which were very expensive at the time. And the architect basically paid me to buy a Mac. I think that cost about £6,000 or something at the time. I got it at a half-price academic discount. But this was I was working on this project, which was a £50 million courts project in London. But along comes the recession, and Mrs. Thatcher left power, and the whole thing was shelved. So suddenly I didn't have a job. I knew the people in the Islamic Tech Society in Cambridge, who I knew them quite well. And I went down to see them, and they said, oh, look, we're trying to get our books into computer, because up to that point, they had everything was done on massive great photosetting machines, and you had the print would come out, and you had to cut it up and paste it down, and it was like a complete nightmare. But actually very good quality. And they had a very good designer working for them called Brian Keeble, who was from the classic Eric Gill, William Morris, very traditional classic typographic tradition. He refused to touch a computer. He wasn't a Luddite, he didn't want to smash it up, but he wouldn't actually physically wouldn't touch it. But I sat there with him over a period of months. We actually set some of the very first ITS books, I think the 99 Names, the Ghazali, I think one was Certainty. And I was basically doing the typesetting, and he was correcting it, and would come back to me covered with blue lines, move this, because he was using the language of photosetting, like 3 microns left. Like, what's a micron? You know, and what was going on? I thought, oh, this is useless. I can't bear this. And suddenly, he came back one day. There's a laser printer, and he said, "This is perfect typesetting." I thought, woof, woof, done. The other thing that was interesting at that time was because, and this is an interesting fact, because of an amount of translations being made at that time from Arabic into English, of course, it affected the typesetting intimately. So you had an alphabet which wasn't 26 characters long, which was 34 characters long, because you had to add all these characters of the different Arabic vowel signs and consonant signs which weren't in the English alphabet. And it was difficult then because Monotype were the only people doing it, and they were developing it at the time. So we were working with Monotype, so we had this one font at the time, which was Bembo, and then we did everything in Bembo. But I got deeper and deeper into it, and then Brian, I think, left, and I was left. Well, a lot of things happened. For some reason, I ended up starting with Yusuf Islam. We were doing some of his books. I was trying to use knowledge with his early experimentations with the prayers of the Prophet and things. A lot of stories around that, which actually in the book. We could talk around and cover a lot of the stories.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna definitely buy the book, because a lot of things that you and I are, you know, alluding to, people are like, what are they talking about? What are these things? Go buy the book. I would like to discuss. Maybe what we do is we get back together in a short period of time after everyone has read the book.
You definitely have questions if you read the book, because it covers a very significant. I mean, a lot has happened since 2003, because it went from 1945 to 2003.
Yeah,
ended when I came to Spain. The Spain thing is a whole other different experience, because I'm reluctant to write about it, because I don't want to upset people at all. I just want to sort of describe what happened as honestly.
Well,
if you describe what happens, you have to be honest, and you have to be honest about your own shortcomings as much as anyone else's. But you have to see the good in what happened as well. There's always going to be bad happening. Human beings make mistakes, for goodness.
Yeah.
And anyway, you have to make the mistakes to see what's there. I mean, it's part of this sort of the revelation of your life. It's the astonishment I was talking about. And of course, you have dramatic things happen in your life: childbirth, parents die, money gets difficult. I mean, England got very difficult. It's one reason I came to Spain, because it was getting so expensive in England. But then Spain has been very kind to me. It's a much easier country to live in if you work by yourself. I've never owed a penny to a bank or anybody in Spain. It was massively different from England, and the book covers up to that point. Yeah, it's worth talking about. I've never actually really promoted it. We did a promotion in Bradford Literature Festival, but I know people who write books, especially biographies. You have to go around the world flogging it. You have to go to, it's exhausting. I'm too old to do all that,
Well, here's a proposition. What I'll do is I'm going to read the text. I've been working with you for so long, and I didn't even know you wrote this book. First of all, let me be honest. So yes, you did. I did a bad job, and you did a bad job promoting the text. But I'm going to read it. And then what's going to happen is we're going to get back together and we're going to have a robust discussion, because I'll tell you why. I honestly believe talking about these events is very helpful, because there's a lot of other communities that are still popping up, going through certain challenges, and people don't necessarily know how to process them. It's like you said, it's all bad, or this person made the mistakes, or even, facing the mistakes that you might have personally made yourself in those situations. I think it'd make a very interesting conversation.
Well, I certainly see. I could see I remember the epilogue in the book. I kind of had to make a kind of précis of what happened in the book. I think the two big lessons I learned was that you can't really start a Muslim community with someone who's charismatic, journalistic, psychological, intelligent, very intellectual, and very. It's not really rooted in some basic sciences.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you can't just sort of do it on just very dry Islam. I read this beautiful thing last night about Ibn Tayyib talking about it. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Iyyaka na'budu is also Sharia. It's all about worship. Iyyaka nasta'in, it's all about the part of you that glorifies Allah. That it's unseen, and it's you say it in the Fatiha every day.
Yeah.
And for me, the building a Muslim community is kind of balance between those things, and it's difficult, because you do have to have knowledge to found a Muslim community. I think it's always going to be a kind of a rough thing. It's never going to be turn a light on and it's magic to start with. It's going to be struggles. There's going to be mistakes, and some people are going to be this. But I do think that there's a lot of good people in the world. I really do think that there's, and I think they're kind of emerging now. I especially think with sort of social media has really made such a difference. I think in Gaza, the world turned suddenly.
Yeah.
My opinion, and suddenly people who were quiet before and invisible have become visible. I mean, this is another, again, I'm into another topic altogether. But it's dramatic times. And one thing Abdul Hakim said to me many times, because we went through sort of 9/11 experience. He says it's strange. The greater the atrocity done by some fake Muslim, the more people come into Islam.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Why is that? Why is that?
It's unbelievable. This is the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla. His nur is going to spread everywhere. Abdul Latif, I would want to continue this conversation with you today, but I know it's late there, and I'm gonna read the book.
It's not Maghrib yet, but I mean,
I'm trying.
Oh, look! This is the latest book. How about this one?
Okay.
We're launching. This is it's called this. It's the Hidayah of Ibn Abidin.
Okay, we can bring it up on screen. So
950 pages.
Mashallah.
You don't drop this on your toes.
Yeah, that's one that and also I've got some books behind me that you typed. I mean, you did so much, Abdul Latif, in the Muslim community. Wallahi, from the bottom of our heart, we thank you for everything that you've done.
I wish I was like my teacher. He never put his names in the books. I just remain invisible.
No, may Allah bless you, and everyone that downloads anything from Al Medina, all of our free dua books that we've been putting out.
Oh yeah, that's. I really enjoy those things actually. I was reading some of the Rifai's poetry today, because you could actually sing that, couldn't you?
So that's exactly how it's and I'll send you a link for it. We're going to actually produce that, and it's sung. It's traditionally sung by the Rifa'i Mashayikh, in particular Sheikh Mahmoud
It's some of the tunes I sing for the Diwan as well.
Yeah.
Is there a reason you didn't use transliteration? I mean, I know that your audience is probably natively Arabic speaking, but
No, they're not really. Actually, what we're finding is that most people do not read Arabic. I mean, that's something that we have to also, take into account. So we're trying to also put in some of the transliteration in some of our texts as well.
When we did this, 2015 was the first edition. This is revised. It's got better Arabic now and a lot more stuff in it. I was insistent that the transliteration went in it because I knew a lot of people who wanted to sing it but couldn't read Arabic, and it was it was a chore. But Abdul Fitzgerald in Marrakesh who put it together. It was over about 6 or 7 years. We didn't even tend to put it as a book. Actually, we were just translating the qasidas, and it was. I knew that I wanted to have something which was accessible for me, not just for other people. And that accessible meant it was available, you could buy it, and it had transliterated Arabic in it, so anyone could.
I think it's a great idea. I think actually, and that's what I've been telling our crew here in the United States. Hey, listen, we have to put the transliteration in there because
it just gives you a bigger participation.
Yeah, so we're going to work on doing that. But Abdul Latif, barakallahu feek for the time that you've had here with us, inshallah, today. And I hope that this is just going to be the one of many conversations.
Yeah, well, until you come to Spain. Or I don't know if I'll ever come to America. I don't like traveling, I'll tell you the truth. My last trip from California, I was really ill. And I just, the idea of being on an aeroplane is just like, I've got to go to England. Anyway, yeah, I look forward to, especially if you read the book, you might have some really serious questions.
Oh no, we're gonna get back together. As soon as we get off, I'm ordering it, and I'm gonna get it, and we're gonna be together soon. Barakallahu feek, Abdul Latif, and to all of our listeners.
It's a pleasure to meet you face to face for the first time.
Inshallah, in person soon. Anyway, everyone out there listening, inshallah, we'll be back together soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.